Good afternoon. Good afternoon and welcome to the National Press Club. My name is Monroe Carmen. I am president of the Press Club and editor-at-large at Bloomberg Business News. I'd like to welcome club members and their guests in the audience, as well as those of you watching on C-SPAN or listening to this program on National Public Radio or the Global Internet Computer Network. Before introducing our head table, I would like to remind our members of future speakers. On Monday, April 17th, actor and comedian Jerry Lewis will give his report on the first 100 days of Congress. On Tuesday, the next day, April 18th, we will hear from Republican presidential candidate Lamar Alexander of Tennessee. And on Wednesday, April 19th, Marine explorer Jean-Michel Cousteau will discuss the search for sustainability, a topic I think every politician is probably interested in. Transcripts and audio and videotapes of Press Club luncheons are available by calling 1-800-500-9911. If you have any questions for our speaker, please write them on the cards at your table, pass them up to me. I will ask as many as time permits. Now I'd like to introduce the head table and ask them to stand briefly. When the names are called, from your right, Kurt Anderson, Associated Press; Jeff Winogrand, editor of Political Newsletter; Stephen Green, Copley News Service; Andy Miller, Kansas City Star; Craig Hines, Washington Bureau Chief, Houston Chronicle; Irv Chapman, CNN, skipping over our speaker; Mark Johnson, Media General News Service and Chairman of the National Press Club Speakers Committee; Joan Lowy, Scripps Howard News Service, and the member of the Speakers Committee who arranged today's luncheons; John Sawyer, Washington Bureau Chief for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch; David Dahl, Washington Bureau Chief, St. Petersburg Times; Rick Dunham of Business Week; and Robert Dodge of the Dallas Morning News. Our speaker today is a truly unique individual. He is a grown man who looks good in short pants. I know. I watched him perform a routine at the Gridiron Club dinner for the president, and I must tell you, Representative Dick Gephardt of Missouri delighted the audience by appearing on stage in an Eagle Scout uniform, complete with wide brim hat, merit badges, and short pants. And I can tell you this, he does have shapely legs. In fact, Congressman Gephardt was an Eagle Scout in his youth. Today, he is a merit badge scout for the Democratic Party. As the Democratic leader in the House, Representative Gephardt has fought hard to protect the interests of the working man and woman, as well as the poor. If you earn $75,000 or less, Representative Gephardt is your man. He is a leader in the fight for tax reform. He co-sponsored the Tax Reform Act of 1986. More recently, he stepped out ahead of the president in support of a middle-class tax cut. He's even attempting to get in front of the Republicans in favor of a flat tax. He also was an outspoken foe of last year's North American Free Trade Agreement with Mexico, a position that is looking better today given that country's economic troubles. As the captain of the House Democratic team, it fell to Congressman Gephardt to pick up the pieces in the wake of the political earthquake last year that gave control of the Congress to the Republicans for the first time in 40 years. It hasn't been easy, but the 53-year-old Mr. Gephardt is both a seasoned political veteran and a part of a new generation of leadership. He was elected to the House from South St. Louis in 1976. 8 years later, he was a founding member of the Democratic Leadership Council, formed to draw the Democratic Party away from the left and toward the political center. In 1988, Mr. Gephardt ran unsuccessfully for the Democratic nomination for president. The question many in Washington are asking today is whether this former Eagle Scout would like to try again for the White House. Today, he will give his report on the first 100 days of the 104th Congress. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to present to you, in long pants, Representative Richard Gephart of Missouri.
Thank you, Mr. President, very much. I was told by Mark Johnson here at the table a moment ago that one of the guests that's coming in a few weeks, wasn't announced by the President, is Sharon Stone. I hope no one got their dates confused, because you're in for a big disappointment. But I do thank the National Press Club for inviting me here today to talk about the first 100 days of the 104th Congress and to take a sober and serious look at the Republican contract with America, who it's helped and who it's hurt. And I must confess it's tempting to dwell on my frankest and most honest critique of the contract, to say that it's been an utter and abject failure, to argue that it's abused the Constitution, distorted the democratic process, and punished young children to pay for tax cuts for the wealthy. But my task is not so simple. The fact is, as these 100 days wind to a close, we are locked in a battle that's fiercer and more furious than any legislative debate we have had since the gavel was passed to Newt Gingrich in January. And that debate is the definition of the contract itself. In recent days, the Republican Party has launched an unprecedented public relations blitzkrieg to push their so-called progress. These days, when you turn on a TV set, you're as likely to see Newt Gingrich as O.J. Simpson. The GOP has unleashed enough speeches and sound bites and strategy memos to employ all of Madison Avenue. That shouldn't come as a surprise. The contract with America, fine-tuned by a pollster and fashioned in focus groups, is all about public relations. And with each drop in their approval ratings, the Republicans are learning that he who lives by the polls dies by the polls as well. But I think it's time for all of us to look past all of this public relations posturing. It's time for us to hold the Republican Party to a higher standard than the one they've chosen for themselves. You see, the strength of a nation is not measured in sound bites. The prospects of a people cannot be lifted by a public opinion poll. The Republicans will try to impress us with the sheer volume of legislation, largely, though, in one house of Congress, as if it's the quantity, not the quality of legislation that matters, as if the United States Congress is supposed to resemble an all-you-can-eat buffet. They'll try to amaze us with the breadth of their ambitions, as if anyone asked them to rewrite the United States Constitution in a flash of ideological ink. Never before has so much been done in so little time to help so few at the expense of so many. Sure, the contract has done some good things, applying the laws we pass to Congress itself. The line-item veto so the President can cut wasteful spending by literally crossing it out of the budget line by line. But if progress means that we'll actually have improved the lives of hardworking Americans, if it means that we will have actually lifted the standard of living that most Americans see as the real benchmark of their strength and security, then it's time for middle-class America to join in one big class action lawsuit and sue the Republican Party for breach of contract. The 100 days are over, and not a single job was created by the contract, unless you count the pollster who worked on it. But millions of jobs, present and potential, will be destroyed as the Republicans eliminate the summer jobs program and refuse to require welfare recipients to work for their welfare checks and slash job training across the board. What happened to the money they saved by sawing off those bottom rungs of the ladder, you may be asking? Well, it went to those at the very top of the ladder in the form of a huge trickle-down tax cut. Not a single American will gain access to health care because of the contract. And yes, there still is a health care crisis in our country. But millions could suffer sickness and hunger and disease because of the deep cuts in the school lunch program, cuts in the nutrition program for pregnant women and babies, cuts in Healthy Start, and cuts in the program that puts heat in the homes of the low-income elderly, all cuts that went to pay for a tax cut for the wealthiest, healthiest Americans. Not a single child will have a better education because of the contract. But millions will be shut out of school because of Republican cuts in the student loan program, cuts in college grants to struggling young people, cuts in Head Start, and the Republicans' refusal to support tax cuts and deductions aimed at education, all because they wanted to give those tax cuts to people who really don't need them, rather than those who do. Not a single American will be safer or more secure because of the contract, but millions will be less safe because the Republicans are revoking our promise to put 100,000 new police on the streets of America. Now, that's just the beginning. The Republicans tried to pass a balanced budget amendment that would have placed Social Security and Medicare on the chopping block. They tried to revive the recklessness of Star Wars, the $46 billion defense disaster the Democrats were just barely able to defeat on the floor of the House. No wonder the Republicans have hauled out all of their bells and whistles this week. If you had voted for that extremist package of policy slogans, you'd need a good spin doctor too. Of course, there is a method to this Republican madness, one which most Republicans have tried to bury beneath their populist rhetoric. And you don't have to take it from me. Take it from the Wall Street Journal, which announced in a headline last month, and I quote, "Big business striking it rich on the GOP contract." Take it from Republican Budget Chairman John Kasich, who said that Republicans would not put corporate giveaways on the budget table because, and I quote, "there are some very big corporations that have their snouts in the trough." Or take it from the New York Times, which explained last Friday that the Republicans have actually let lobbyists write their legislation from start to finish. Let me quote, "Congressional staff members openly and publicly embraced legislative outsiders with extensive interests in the outcome." Now just think about this for a moment. Lobbyists, elected by no one in the country, paid to protect the privileged, actually wrote Republican legislation from start to finish. At some high-level meetings, Republican staffers admitted they didn't even know all the details of the legislation themselves. Now, let's face it, those lobbyists got the Congress they paid for. It's an approach that's best summarized by Republican strategist David Frum, who told Harper's Magazine, and I quote, "The Republicans are much more afraid of angry symphony-goers than they're afraid of people starving to death." He said it's just political reality. The central challenge facing America in this Congress, in this decade, in this generation, is not to line the pockets of symphony-goers, but to raise the wages and incomes of office-goers, factory-goers, and farm-goers. The kind of decent, hard-working families I met going door-to-door in Afton, Missouri just this past Sunday. But that agenda, the people's agenda, couldn't be farther from the Republican agenda. Over the past 3 months, Americans watched in amazement as Republicans ravaged our most basic commitments to struggling families. Those cuts would be wrong no matter what purpose they served. We have a moral obligation as a society and as a people to lift up those who are in danger of being left out. It's a compact and a commitment that is as old as the Bible itself. But the reason behind these cuts truly adds insult to injury. A capital gains tax cut, nearly 80% of which goes to those earning more than $100,000 a year. If you're in the top 1% of earners, earning more than $350,000 a year, you reap an annual windfall of about $13,000. But if you make less than $100,000 a year, if you're part of the vast majority of Americans who've seen their real wages decline for the past 16 years, you get an average of 50 cents a week, enough to buy a newspaper, to find out how those wealthy Americans are spending their new tax breaks. While Democrats have strived to champion the average working American, Republicans have literally zeroed out all taxes paid by a handful of America's largest corporations. Now, I don't need a poll or a focus group to tell me what's wrong with the Republican agenda. I don't need someone to find the words to describe it. It's unconscionable, it's reckless, and it's fundamentally unfair. Now, the Republicans wanted this to be the 100 days that literally shook the world, and it was. But now we're beginning to see who really got shaken. So you say, well, that's fine, but where do we go from here? How do we move past these 100 days to really find a path to progress? Well, I must tell you that it's not an easy question. To see so many of the building blocks of our society demolished, to see so many seniors and children and hardworking families hurt, does not necessarily engender the warmest feelings of bipartisanship. Not only do I reject the Republicans' means to reach their goals, I reject many of their goals as well. But I come here today to say that together, Republicans and Democrats must find a better way. Together, we must reach across party lines and begin to make real and lasting progress for the people who have been forgotten during these 100 days. Working families and the middle class and the people trying to get into the middle class. We were sent here to work with all of the other members of Congress to try to move this country forward, no matter who holds the gavel and no matter who sits in the Speaker's chair. I believe that progress will be possible once rank-and-file Republicans are freed from the shackles of the contract with America. And I believe that while our politics may diverge, we share a basic humanity that demands that we move forward on great and forgotten issues such as health care reform, job creation, and education. And I'm here today to offer more than words and rhetoric. I'm here to offer real solutions, a blueprint for the next 500 days on issues that can help us to meet the single central challenge of our time, reviving our standard of living and redeeming the American dream. What I'm offering is a starting point for a real conversation we all need to have as Democrats, as Republicans, as Americans. That's a conversation Democrats will be taking all across America to town halls and union halls and farmhouses and factory floors to boardrooms and living rooms. We'll listen and we'll learn, and we'll be willing to change our mind before we ask anybody or anyone to sign on the dotted line. And I make this pledge today. I'm willing to sit down with any Republican at any time if they truly want to make progress on these issues. I'm willing to compromise. I'm willing to work through our differences. But the time for progress is now. The price of delay is too great for the families that are falling behind. To begin with, before we can even start to talk about a real middle-class agenda, we have to rein in the special interests that are running rampant. These 100 days have only given the lobbyists more loopholes to jump through and more tax breaks they don't need, more unelected power in the halls of Congress. That's not the kind of change the American people voted for in November. We need strong lobbying reform, and we need a tough, uncompromising ban on gifts from lobbyists and special interests to lawmakers. Just because the Republicans wouldn't let these bills pass doesn't mean the need for them has passed. And while we're at it, we can make the one change that will permanently shrink the stature of the lobbyists and the special interests. We can reform not just campaign finance laws, but campaigns themselves to make them shorter, cheaper, and more focused on real and substantive issues. I'll be talking more about that idea in the coming months. Beyond that, our first priority must be to value work and to ensure that it pays decent, livable wages. That's why Democrats refused to rubber stamp a Republican welfare bill that had absolutely no work requirement. And that's why we refused to endorse a Republican tax cut that rewards special interests at the expense of the middle class. Now it's time to raise up the minimum wage by 90 cents an hour, to make work pay more than welfare, and to ensure that in the United States of America, no working family lives in poverty. It's time to encourage businesses to pay their workers for gains in productivity and performance, so that we never again have a year like last year, 1994, when corporate profits surged, largely because worker productivity rose, but household income actually fell. And we've got to do much more to train and prepare our workers for new technologies and newer and tougher economic realities by improving our nation's training programs, expanding what works and abandoning what doesn't. Our second order of business is to rebuild America itself, to make sure that we have the physical foundation we need to compete throughout the world. That means investing in infrastructure, in roads and bridges and technology to create jobs and to make America a more efficient economic powerhouse. One way to do that is by using part of the money we collect for the highway funds to leverage private investment, a special new capital fund for America's future. It also means fair trade, rules for globalization, not resistance to it. Just as we cannot allow protectionism to rise in this country, we must break down other nations' protectionist policies. and we must find a way to bring the third and fourth world countries into our global economy gradually and carefully to lift up their wages and standards instead of dragging ours down. Third, rather than forcing deep and disastrous cuts in programs that help our children, we need to invest even more in our children's education, safety, and development. There is simply no other way that we can remain a first-rate nation, one in which everyone rises as high as their talent and capability can carry them. We need a tax cut targeted to education, not capital gains. We need to reinvigorate our public schools so that they achieve the results we want for our children and for the employers who will soon depend on them for everything. Let's start identifying and rewarding the schools that give their students what they need to succeed. I call it rewards for results. It's the only way to ensure that our education dollars are well spent. At the same time, we should heed the model of James Comer, a professor at Yale, and realize that by keeping schools open later, by offering extra classes, support, and outreach to parents, we can turn wasted space into opportunities to engage our young people. These Comer schools, which are all around the country today, but not in enough places, also serve as places where children can go to escape crime and drugs. So we can prevent crime instead of just making the prison industry our largest growth industry. Another crucial answer to crime can be found in our own homes and neighborhoods. For example, we can let parents control the kind of TV programs that come into their homes so they can keep violence off the screen. And we can ask the entertainment industry to work with parents to curb corrosive influence of TV violence. Fourth, thank you. Fourth, just because health care became a problem for the politicians last year doesn't mean that we'd stop being a problem for working Americans. Last year, the Republicans said they shared our goal of expanding access to health care. Why can't we work together on a bipartisan basis to make good on that commitment? Let's start by helping the working families who've already seen both their job security and their health security decay. We need real insurance reform so people can't be denied or dropped from their coverage at the very moment they need that coverage. We should extend a worker's ability to buy their employer's health coverage even after they lose their job. And to make it easier for employers and employees to get health insurance, we should give Americans access to the same health plan that members of Congress have. Fifth, when it comes to America's foreign policy, let's not retreat from collective security and pour billions of dollars into a failed Star Wars system. Let's not abandon the bipartisan path of reason and responsibility that kept us and the world strong for more than 50 years. Instead, let's commit ourselves to three core principles: the readiness of our troops, the economic needs of their families, and the well-being of the veterans who have served so well in times of conflict. Sixth, we must do much, much more to promote small businesses in this country, to cut through the maze of regulation that hinders them, and to recognize that they are the real engines of economic growth in America. I've seen the tremendously positive impact of a strong small business community in my own town of St. Louis, and I've seen the odds that they're sometimes up against. We must do much more to help them, and we are committed to doing it. Finally, some of the best ideas are really not new ideas at all. At a time when our most basic commitments to senior citizens have come under attack, I believe we need a strong bipartisan commitment to preserve Social Security and Medicare, two of the greatest government triumphs of this century. Now, that's not to say that Democrats won't discuss changes in these programs with the goal of improving them, making them sounder, making them more efficient. But we will not be pawns in a partisan budget game where Social Security and Medicare fall on the chopping block to make up for shortfalls in other areas. Social Security and Medicare are sacred commitments, not congressional candy jars. I have no doubt that some in both political parties will see in the Republicans' electoral success, and perhaps even in their astonishing party line obedience, a reason to try to copy the contract, to try to transform our goals and priorities into short and pithy slogans, and to try to legislate the most complex and far-reaching policy in a matter of hours or days, maybe even 100 days. I think that would be a tragic mistake. Because whether or not you agree with the contract with America, whether or not you believe in the supply-side fallacy that would starve Main Street to stuff Wall Street, something even deeper and more fundamental has been lost in these 100 days. And that is a respect for democracy itself. A belief that the American people deserve more than a slogan and a bumper sticker and a few hours of hurried debate in a committee or on the floor of the Congress. With more time and more deliberation, there is no question in my mind that most Americans would have recognized this contract as too extreme, too much in thrall to the special interests, too closely tied to privilege at the expense of working families in the middle class. And there is no question that many Republicans, as responsive, responsible public servants, would have changed their votes on part of the contract if the truth had been fully stated and debated. Maybe that is what is really missing from all of the Republican speeches and press releases trumpeting the 100 days. The sense that we are here to serve the people, not to spin them. The sense that good policy is built on deliberative process, not on diktats, required reading lists, and daily pronouncements. The sense that any proposal good enough for the United States of America can surely survive the bright light of scrutiny and even the sting of reasoned criticism. That's why we plan to take this new Democratic agenda to the American people and to the Republican Party before we even think of setting it in stone. You see, before long, the American people, I think, will realize that the first 100 days have passed, and not only are they not better off, they may be a lot worse off as a result. That may dull our appetite for silver bullet solutions. With any luck, it should at least dull our appetite for sharp partisanship and special interest politics. Then, with some of the contract's planks amended or rejected by the Republican Senate, and perhaps even vetoed by the President, we can deliver this epitaph for the contract with America. May it rest in peace. And now let's get down to the real business of the American people. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. And now the hard part, the questions. How much of the Republican tax and spending cuts will survive in the Senate? And as a corollary, in the end, when all the debating and negotiating is done, do you expect to see President Clinton signing some sort of tax cut into law?
I think the tax issue will be changed dramatically in the Senate, and I think the President can sign a tax bill and wants to sign a tax bill. Again, if it is changed so that it is targeted at the people who need the tax cut, and if the tax cut is affordable given the challenge we face to balance the budget in the next 7 years. What we tried to describe on the floor of the House in this last week was a more affordable, a more sensible, and we thought a more effective and focused tax cut on the people that really need it. If you really think about it, if we're going to be competitive in the days ahead, in a very competitive world, the only way we're going to do it and retain our standard of living, which I said in my speech is the core challenge we face as a people, is if our people have mental capability. The only way we can compete is if they have the mental skills in order to be as productive as they must be. And so we targeted our tax cuts at investing in people to give them that necessary education. We said, let's set up an expanded individual retirement account that can be used for education. We said, let's make student loans interest deductible. Let's not cut out student loans. Let's make the interest deductible so that young people can pay them off. We said, let's let families deduct $10,000 a year for education expenses and training expenses. And we said for young families that don't make a lot of money but want their children to go on with education, let's set up a new U.S. savings education bond where you'd put $50 or $75 a quarter away for a young child, and by the time they reach 18, you'd have $16,000 or $18,000 to educate and to help educate that young person. Those are the kinds of targeted, focused investments that we feel the tax code should have been encouraging. Rather than a tax cut by the Republicans, over half of which would have gone to families who make $100,000 a year or more a year. Let me say that again. Over half of their tax cut was targeted at families that make over $100,000 a year or more. It does not make sense. It's not wise. It's not effective. It's not needed. And they chose, most importantly, to do this before they got us on the road to the balanced budget. So for both reasons, it was wrong, it was ineffective, it was unwise. And I believe that the United States Senate will change this tax cut. If they do, and if we can come out of a conference committee with the kind of tax cut that I've talked about, I think the President will sign it. He has called for a middle-income tax cut for over a year now, and I believe he would happily sign such a bill, and he should.
Thank you. A couple questions on the flat tax. When will we see the details of your flat tax proposal? And secondly, doesn't going to a flat tax run the risk of giving another huge benefit to the wealthy?
Well, if you do a flat tax, as the Republicans are talking about it, you will give the largest tax break in the history of mankind to the people at the top. Dick Armey, who's the majority leader, has a flat tax proposal. He'd throw out a lot of deductions and exemptions, and he'd get us to a 17% flat rate for everybody in the country. Now, that's bad enough because that would mean that families earning $25,000 a year would pay at the same rate as families earning $500,000 a year. I believe in a progressive income tax, and I think as we do better, we have a greater ability to help be responsible for paying the bills of the country. But in addition, his flat tax proposal excludes from the income tax what we call unearned income, capital gains, when you sell a stock or a bond, which is the wealthy person's dream come true. I mean, that's not just a cut in capital gains, that's no capital gains. So this is the dream bill of the privileged few. I believe that we can do a flatter tax and a simpler tax. In the next months, I will be bringing forth a very specific proposal. It will be a progressive tax. It will not be one that puts everybody at the same level. And I'd rather hold the details of that until we're ready to talk about it in some detail, and I will be in the next weeks and months. Let me say one final thing about taxation. Something interesting has begun to happen lately. Some Republicans are going right by the flat tax and they're going straight to a national sales tax to take the place of the income tax. Now, this is the worst proposal of all. This would mean that on everything you buy, no matter what your income is, you would pay a 17% national sales tax on top of the state sales tax that's already in existence. And in some parts of the country, the state sales tax is already up near 10%. So you'd pay 27% in those states on a car, on a refrigerator, probably on food, and on every other thing that you would purchase. I can't imagine a worse idea, but it's gaining traction. Conservative Republicans are for it for obvious reasons. And before it gets out of the barn here and people start actually seriously looking at it, I think we better start pointing out its real flaws.
A couple of questions on spending side. Is spending on education, infrastructure, and the other programs that you support more important than balancing the budget by the year 2002? And secondly, let's face it, are the Democrats capable of cutting social programs?
Well, Democrats are not only capable of it, we've done it, and frankly, we did a better job of it than the Republicans ever did because we did it with a sense of values that I think are right, not wrong. We passed in 1993, Democratic President, Democratic Congress, the largest deficit reduction in 15 years, and we did it without one single solitary Republican vote in the House or the Senate. It's historic. It probably never happened. And I'm not complaining. We had the responsibility and we did it, and I would do it again if we had the responsibility, and I admire the President for having the courage and fortitude to come to the country and the Congress with that very tough, effective budget. And we did it by cutting programs and cutting and modifying the way we spend money. And we need to do more of that, and Democrats are quite willing and able to do that. We will have alternative balanced budget scenarios out there to be voted on in the House of Representatives. But there's a big difference between cutting a budget and getting a budget into balance with some sense of the needs of the American people and helping people in places where they really need help and are not going to get it anywhere else, and just going in with a machete and hacking out things that are absolutely necessary to people. Let me just mention one cut that the Republicans have already flopped up on the table, and that's the cut in student loans. I mean, it's just mindless. It's breathtaking in its lack of sense. I mean, we have young people in this country, the only way they're going to realize their ambitions, the only way our country is going to be competitive and hold our standard of living is if they have the ability to get trained and educated. I met with the heads of corporations the other day and I asked them, what is your #1 concern about making it in the next 10 years and being competitive and being strong? They said the education and the mental capability of our workers. We don't handle things anymore in the economy. It's all mind capability. We are knowledge workers in this country. And if we don't allow this investment, this is not welfare. This is not a handout. These young people are asking for a chance, a loan. They pay the money back with interest. And the Republicans are saying, oh, we can't do that. That's not important. It's eating our seed corn. It's insane. And so as we do this budget balancing, and we must do it, let's do it with a sense of values and wisdom of what is important for our country. And let's not just do it in a mindless way that will leave us weaker than we were before. Yes, balance the budget, but it's not the only goal that's out there. It's not so paramount that we would hurt ourselves and damage our people in the way that we do it. And I believe you'll see from Democrats the kind of sensible budget balancing suggestions that I think we started with in a very aggressive way in 1993.
Affirmative action. Are affirmative action programs fair? Should they be curtailed? If so, how?
Well, first let me say that one of the proudest achievements of this society is that we have always been a fair society and one that has resisted and fought discrimination in every place that we can. We passed civil rights laws in this country in the mid-60s that made a huge change over time in the outcome and result for people. We must not and we cannot go back on that commitment. Social justice, fairness, fighting discrimination lies at the heart of this giant, diverse society. And we must never backtrack from that commitment. It is the right thing to do. We always must be ready to review any program, any action that we take in the government to see that it is doing what it's supposed to do, that it's not being abused, that it's not being improperly applied, that something is not happening that we don't want to happen. In the original civil rights laws and affirmative action policy statements, we specifically outlawed reverse discrimination. We don't want people to be discriminated against for any reason, even if the reason is that we're trying to get people not to be discriminated against. And so this idea that somehow these laws are about quotas or they're being used for reverse discrimination, they're being used unfairly, if that's the case, we need to find it out, we need to root it out, and we need to change it. And if the rules are not correctly written, we need to rewrite them. If the people administering the rules are not administering them fairly and correctly, they need to be replaced or changed in their behavior. But let me end with this personal story. I grew up in St. Louis in the 50s. When I was a kid, minorities could not go to the shows that I went to. They couldn't drink out of the same fountain that I drank out of. They couldn't go to restaurants where I could go. We're beyond that. We've made tremendous progress. We should be very proud of that. When I went to law school at the University of Michigan, there may have been 2 or 3 women in the whole class. Maybe 1 minority. That was in 1962, not long ago. A little longer than I'd like to think, but not long ago. I went back to the University of Michigan Law School recently. I'd say 1/3 to maybe even more of the class is women. There were a great number of minorities in the class. When I came back to St. Louis later in the 60s to practice law, there may have been 1 woman partner of a major law firm in St. Louis. Now there are many. And there were probably no minorities in major law firms, and now there are some. We've come a long way. We should be proud of that. And we need to go further. We are not done. We're not there yet. The fact that you've made progress doesn't mean that you've reached the goal. It means that you've made progress. We need to review how we've made that progress. We don't want to make mistakes, but we cannot back up and we cannot give up on making this society, as the Republicans say, colorblind and gender blind.
Would you accept a campaign finance reform bill that prohibits out-of-state contributions for both House and Senate races, including from Washington-based labor and business PACs?
Well, let me state first, as I said in the speech, I'm very much for campaign reform. I think it lies at the heart of our ability to get this link between special interest and public servants to be broken. And I think there is far too much money involved in campaigns. I think campaigns are far too long. We can talk until the cows come home about a lot of different well-meaning suggestions about how to do this. The bills that we've worked on have tried to limit how much money could be spent in a campaign cycle. And we've had a horrible time getting this done, and even though we passed the bill twice in the House, we were not able to get it through the Senate and get it done. I don't know anymore if there's a lot more that we can accomplish on the wavelength or the pattern that we've been working on in campaign reform. And I am thinking about right now and working on, I guess you'd call them more radical ideas of campaign reform, and I'll present those in May after we get back. And I'd rather leave it at that because I haven't done all the work that I need to do on it. Just in general, I think we got to start looking at the output in campaigns as opposed to all the inputs. We've been up here focused on where the money comes from, how much comes in, where it comes from, out of state, in state, and we've gotten ourselves into a position where I'm not sure we can pass anything. I think it may be easier to kind of clear our minds and start looking at what is done in campaigns. What do campaigns look like? You know, I'm very worried about where we are in this political process. I must tell you that. Most of the advertisements you see are negative advertisements. Consultants tell me that now voters almost won't accept positive information about candidates. The only thing they'll accept is negative information. And if you sit back now and look at the ads coming at you during an election cycle, by the time you get done, it's almost you don't want to vote because you think everybody's bad, or if you do vote, it's the least worst alternative. That's a heck of a way to start your 2 years or 4 years in office. Have everybody think that you're the least worst alternative. We got to have faith in public servants. We got to restore faith in our government. And through our campaign method, we are tearing down the confidence and the belief and the faith that people have in their public servants. There's got to be a better way. Campaigns are too long in this country. They're inordinately long. People are worn out by the time they vote. And we are overly negative. I don't think any of us have understood the effect of television advertising on campaigns. You got to really step back and say, is a 30-second spot with music and emotion and pictures appropriate to a necessary dialogue in a democracy? What can you say in 30 seconds? Can you even exchange an idea or many ideas in 30 seconds? Is that the way to go about it? So I'm trying to step back and really look at this process and say, is this as good as we can do? Can we do better? And what would that look like? And I'll be trying to talk about that in a month or so.
Will Republicans be able to repeal the ban on assault weapons?
I don't know the answer. I don't know where the votes would be. The votes in the last Congress were for that proposal. If they do, I suspect the President will veto it, and I believe his veto can be sustained in the Congress. I don't argue, and I don't think anyone does, that this alone is the answer to the crime problem, but I think it can be a help. I think the Brady bill, which is another effort, is showing its worth. I think they've already, apprehended people that are violent offenders or have criminal records trying to buy handguns and have stopped them from getting a hold of them. I can't argue to you that that will always be successful, but I think it's a step in the right direction. And this crime business, this violence is so awful in this country that we really do have to continue to find ways to stop it. And finally, let me say that I don't think that any of these gun proposals, as interesting and useful as they may be, really are going, though, to get us at the heart of the problem. The heart of the problem is people. You know, the old bumper sticker that says people kill people, guns don't kill people, have some truth in them. And if we don't do something about our children, and I tried to talk about that in my speech, we are not going to get our hands around this problem. Governor Cuomo told me the other day that in his 12 years as governor, he built more prison cells in New York than all of the governors in New York history. My governor in Missouri tells me he will double the number of prison cells in Missouri in the 4 years that he will be governor. We cannot afford, put aside all of your other thoughts about this, we cannot afford as a society to put away everybody that's going to be needed to be put away if we do not begin to prevent and stop crime. We can't afford it. There's not enough money in the country to be paid in taxes to get this done. We all know that there's got to be a better answer. And I believe it's in dealing with children. The sociologists that I talk to, the children experts that I talk to, like Jim Comer, say that you've got to deal with a child before they're 3 or 4 years old. We know how to do this. The other thing Comer says and others say is that, you know, if you were a general fighting a war against violence, you'd say, what are our assets? There's one asset in every community, and that's a school and a staff in that school, in that public school. It may not be doing the job today, but it can. In Comer schools, they start at 6 in the morning, they go till 6 or 8 at night. They bring the parents in and try to get them involved in the school with their children. They try to get a pupil-teacher ratio down from 30-to-1 to 15-to-1 so that they can really begin to deal with the problems of their children. We can do this. It is being done. It'll cost a little more money per year per child, but it's better than 20 grand a year for a prison cell, which we cannot afford. And I believe we've got to wrap our hands around this problem. That will stop crime and violence.
Before we get to our celebrated last question, I'd like to present you with a gift of appreciation for,
Thank you.
For appearing with us today, and a National Press Club mug that you can use to stay awake or solicit funds to balance the federal budget with. Either way.
Thank you.
Our final question. If you were asked to present a merit badge to Speaker Gingrich, what would it be?
Well, I know you don't remember my lines at the Gridiron show because you were in the back getting dressed for another routine, but I said to the group that I had really earned these merit badges I had on, and I even named some of them: camping, hiking, swimming, and then I said gavel passing. And I'd really like Newt to earn the gavel passing merit badge so I can be Speaker in 1996. Thank you very much.
I'd like to give our thanks to Melissa Bender, Pat Nelson, Melanie Abdo-Dermott, and Jeff Tarbell for organizing today's luncheon, and we thank you all for being with us, and good afternoon. All right?
That was a great job. It was great. Thank you.